Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today we have a special interview with an Israeli Bedouin who went on to become an Israeli diplomat. So it's an incredible story from a shepherd boy to a diplomat, and this is his remarkable story. In this program today we'll also be discussing what's life like for the Bedouin Arab community in Israel, as so many Bedouins serve in Israel's defense forces, defending the nation from the threat of terrorism. And we'll also be discussing in this program the growing threat of the Israel Apartheid Week, which is organized internationally around the world, and its sole purpose is to delegitimize and demonize the Jewish state. So we'll be asking, where is the real apartheid in the Middle East today? And today I'm joined by Ismail Khalidi, and you are a Bedouin serving with the Israeli Embassy in London. So it's a great pleasure to have you on the program today.
Thank you, Simon. I'm very happy to be with you here.
Very good. Ishmael, can you tell us your story? Because you've got quite an amazing story, that you were brought up in a Bedouin community, living in a tent, walking 4 miles to school each day. What was life like for your community, living in a Bedouin tent in Israel?
Life was nice, good, challenging, because growing up without electricity, without running water, that only gives you more motivation to stand up and make more efforts. Bedouins are nomadic people. This is our origins and our lifestyle. We lived in a tent until 8 years old, until I was 8 years old, and I had to walk back and forth to school. I think the connection between family members, that's the strongest part of it. We were poor, but we were very happy, I think, and developed, the values of respect, hospitality, commitment to family values as our guiding principles in life. And yes, I arrived to London about a year ago. Just completed a year here being in London in my position. It's very challenging, I have to admit, like every a diplomat, but being Israeli diplomat is much more challenging.
I can believe it.
And we like challenges.
Very good. And you were one of 3 of 11 children, so a big family. And what was your childhood like growing up on a Bedouin community? I think it was in the Galilee, weren't you? Were you born in the Galilee?
Yeah, the Bedouins in Israel are 2 main communities. One, the majority are in the Negev, desert of the Negev, the southern part of the country, and the smaller is where I am coming from, the Galilee up in the north. And childhood again was very quiet, I think. Very it was very good. And looking about what's happening around the village, seeing the big city, Haifa, for instance, which we can see from where we lived, always gave us a more, motivation, and more curiosity to want to do more and see more, and of course, invest in effort to reach out and get out of this little, shell called the tribal frame. And I was probably the more, I would say, wild, if you want to call it, to be courageous enough to leave the family, or leave the village, and go to education, to university, because education wasn't part of our culture, tradition. Bedouins used to be nomads, so they didn't build schools. Bedouins also are Muslims, but we didn't build mosques because of being, nomads. But that was the reason I left the village. I went to school, first in another village, then I went to Haifa. And, the connection back to the village to the family became weaker. Not that I left the family, the connection still was there, but there was a goal and a reason for that. And then from high school, went to university, and I did some works in between. Then border police service, And then I went to a master's degree and worked for the American Embassy for about 3 years. And then 8 years ago, I joined the Foreign Service to be Israeli diplomat because I believed in my role. And again, the way back to the village and to the family almost disappeared because, I do visit them today. But in a way, I'm keeping my tradition of being nomad. So I served in San Francisco before I went back to Israel. Now I am in London. And
Excellent.
that's another step.
And what was life like serving in the IDF? I mean, you just told me earlier that you served and are part of the border police. As many Bedouins also become some of Israel's best trackers. As anyone who's been to Israel and you see the border, you have a fence and there's some sand before you get to the road. And so many of the Bedouin track so many infiltrators that come into Israel, don't they? And they're some of Israel's best soldiers.
The connection to the state of Israel, of Bedouins to the state of Israel as a Jewish state started in the 1930s and 1940s, even before the state was established, when the first Jewish pioneers came to establish the first agricultural cooperatives like kibbutzim, and so they made connections with the Bedouins. And that was, again, part of our hospitality. You respect a newcomer, and no matter what's his background, no matter where's he coming from, and building, those relations. And those who goes really to the Galil, especially Galilee in the north, would find the vast majority of Bedouin communities living near a kibbutz or a Jewish, town. And as part of that, or as a result of that, military service. The 1940s, even before the IDF was established, before the state was established again, the Palmach, which is the pre-state military organization, which was established to protect or defend Jewish, towns. There were Bedouins who served there. 1948, when Israel was established and the IDF, the Israel Defense Force, was established, Bedouins continued that tradition and served first as trackers because that was probably one of the best things they could contribute to the Israeli Defense Force. Yes, patrolling around the borders, along the borders around the country and so on. But today, the Bedouins are almost everywhere in the military. The Israeli military is considered, and it is true, a melting pot of the Israeli society. Because if you look at Israel as a society, it's one of the most diverse societies in the entire world. Diverse ethnic minorities, Jews and Arabs, Christians and Muslims and Jews, and people coming from all over. And when they attend military service, those differences just disappear, and people are, sleeping in the same tent, doing the same patrol, and they are dedicated for the same goal.
And why do so many Bedouins actually join up with the IDF and actually serve 2 or 3 years?
Again, the military service for Bedouins is not we are not under the compulsory service, but because of the background of social, economic issues, the decision then was made by the IDF and of course the government officials is not to include the Bedouins under the compulsory service, because you cannot treat such a community with so many issues we had to face as everybody else. First of all, the decision was to help them settle down, change our lifestyle, and change settle more, integrate into the Israeli modern society, and then encourage their volunteerism.
Oh, very interesting. And what's life like now for the Bedouin community living and working in Israel?
It's you asked me before, and I think it's funny because we are moving. It's a culture in transition. We're not nomads anymore. Okay, as a community, we are more settled, the vast majority, and there are many issues, with infrastructure, with education, with other services. But if you go to every village, you would see the smallest kid and the oldest person is with an iPhone maybe or with a smartphone, and things are changing. And
That's quite amazing. I mean, I had the privilege back in the summer of 1996 to actually visit a Bedouin village as part of my program with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And one thing I was so impressed with is with the warmth and the hospitality. And I really enjoyed playing football with some Bedouin teenagers as well, so that was good fun. When it comes down to, you are the first serving Israeli Bedouin diplomat. Your family must be very proud of you, and your community also must be very proud that you've now reached this high pinnacle of representing the State of Israel on a diplomatic level. What are some of the challenges that you've personally faced as an Arab diplomat representing the State of Israel?
You know, again, I think every diplomat, by the way, it's not only Israeli diplomats. Being a diplomat is not an easy thing because you have to represent, you know, the country. You are the face of the country, the economy, the education, the culture, the music, everything, the politics also. Even though you are a civil servant, so you are always on the forefront. Now, as you know, Israel is in its special. Maybe sensitive situation today and position as part of the Middle East, being Israeli diplomat is challenging. And now being Israeli Bedouin Muslim diplomat, that's even sometimes impossible because, yes, the challenge is, if you ask me in person, sometimes when you go to places, if that's a venue on a campus or other places you want to meet people, you want to talk to people, people look at you in a very mixed feeling, and it's not a secret. It's, for them, wait a second, if Israel is considered as a Jewish state, then what kind of diplomat you are? Is that true, or is that? It's confusing also. And those who understand, or those who really knows, respect and do meet. And I think it's sometimes are being shocked. Because it's totally different from what they know about Israel. And I think this is our challenge, really, of Israeli diplomats to bring, this message that it is a multicultural society and it's a multilingual society and multi-religious society where people from all different, faiths and backgrounds and languages are living in harmony with each other. Again, it's not a perfect place, but it is totally different from what, say, the media brings here, or what, No,
absolutely. And also, you've been posted here as an Israeli diplomat based in London. What have been your impressions of Britain, and certainly its speaking engagements that you've been involved in?
Before I came here, and I had to learn about the culture and history, and it's very one of the also we have a lot of things to share, from being democratic values, open societies, diverse cultures, but when it comes to political attitudes, that is the most disturbing things I've ever seen before. You're supposed to strengthen the ties between your country and the United Kingdom here. The different societies, the different ethnic minorities, the different organizations, strengthen ties between campuses and more and more. This is your role as a diplomat, to be the link. But the attitude here, at the most part, the civil society sector, that's what I'm dealing with before, is very hostile. And that is very sad. And I think there is no reason, I'm coming from a democracy and from, a culture where hospitality is the best known part. So we may not agree with each other. We may be different in our views about, politics and we know that, we as diplomats, of course, we know that Israel is in a situation of a conflict with the Palestinians and with our neighbors, the Arab countries. But singling Israel out and accusing Israel being an apartheid state and racist state and the reason of every issue in the Middle East or in the world, so there is kind of unbalanced view here, and this is what we are trying to change, and we want to change. We want it to be changed by itself.
Well, you're doing a good job, firstly, by coming on the Middle East Report to explain Israel's position. We have a clip to go to now, and this is something called the Israel Apartheid Week that is being planned and organised by the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions campaign internationally throughout the world, but mainly occurring at our university campuses across the country.
It has really been incredible to see how it has developed. When we first started Apartheid Week in Toronto, there was no way we would have imagined that it would have grown to be this big.
Nothing about this week is motivated by hate. It's motivated by justice. It's about using our freedom to defend the freedom of Palestinians to exist in peace and dignity and with full equality in their land.
The apartheid system in Israel has different shapes and forms toward different parts of the Palestinian people.
Very clearly, like South Africa, like the Spanish Civil War, like humanity's struggle against the US imperialism in Indochina, this is the moment of the Palestinian struggle.
I'm saying, comrades, that is enough. That is enough to make us angry about our implication. That is enough to make us angry, to hold our universities, our companies, our governments to account that their relationship with anyone in the world, if it is not in the interest of justice, freedom, and equality, then they must come down.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Ishmael, we saw on that clip, organised as part of the Israel Apartheid Week, really shows how ridiculous this whole notion is. And the actual fact that you are here, sitting in our TV studios, representing the State of Israel, surely shows, as an Arab, there is no actual apartheid in Israeli society.
You know, it's ridiculous. Because if you are speaking about, apartheid, so you are speaking about Israel treating its Arab citizens, like myself. I'm an Israeli. Yes, and I'm Arab, I'm a Bedouin, and I'm a Muslim. But when they say apartheid, look what they are showing. They are showing, the Palestinian issue, which is totally different. That's a national conflict with the Palestinians. And we know that. Israelis, the vast majority of Israelis, if you want to make the distinction, Israeli Jews want to see the Palestinians living in dignity, living in respect with their own state, an open society, like people living here, like people living in Israel, and any other country in the West. Now, those people who are initiated the Israel Apartheid Week, who are arranging the Israel Apartheid Week on campuses, I assure you that most of them have never been to the region, to the Middle East. And all they are doing is spreading more tension, hatred, and of course, misleading messages to young generation here on campuses. I've been to South Africa about 2 years ago, twice in the same year, and I went there. I went to the Museum of Apartheid, and I saw what did it mean. If you would be black and if you would be white, you couldn't go to the same football match and sitting on the same side. Would this happen? Is that the situation in Israel? I'm telling you, first of all, they have no idea about the history of the Israel-Palestinian conflict, and not about the fact of Israel today. If Israel would be an apartheid state, I wouldn't be here. If Israel would be an apartheid state, an Arab Christian, by the way, wouldn't be serving as a Supreme Court judge today. If Israel would be an apartheid, you would hardly see Arabs living, sitting on the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament, and more and more and more. So I think, this is really the big challenge. And what bothers me is not those events, but that the vast majority is silent. Nobody is standing up and nobody to counter them. That is what bothers me.
Absolutely, and we need to counter them. But we've got a clip we're going to go to very shortly, and this is you speaking at the University of Edinburgh.
Trying to speak.
That's what I mean. You were scheduled to speak and you weren't allowed to. And this is a clip we got to go to now that really does show how any debate on Israel is closed down by groups like the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign and also the Boycott, Divestment and Sanction Campaign, as we can see in this clip now.
Palestinians counting Gaza. Where's the freedom of speech for the students? You should not be allowed to speak at a university. You represent the apartheid state. You should not be welcome. Citizens of Israel. We don't discuss with the Ku Klux Klan. Why should we discuss with this thug?
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Ishmael, I was absolutely so shocked by seeing that clip, primarily because our democratic and our academic institutions such as universities are a place of learning, but they're also a place of debate and discussion. And surely what we saw there was a complete closure of academic expression and academic thought that really goes to the very heart of this issue, which is an issue of debate, isn't it? The opportunity to speak and put your position forward. And what also concerned me in that clip there as well was chanting from the River Jordan to the sea, which is effectively calling for genocide against the Jewish people and against the state of Israel.
Yeah, let's start with this. First of all, there are a few things here about this clip that I will never forget in my life. First of all, if the main goal is clear, as you say it, to delegitimize the state of Israel. And it's right to exist as a Jewish state. But Israel is existing, Israel is prospering, and Israel is flourishing despite those calls. And that's our moral responsibility to make sure this is happening. Now, I told you before that I'm coming from a culture of hospitality. Yes, I challenge all of them and their supporters. Okay, if they have a solution for this, for this conflict with the Palestinians, if that's what they are saying, I want to hear it. I want to listen to that. You can't speak about democracy and shutting someone from speaking. If this is democracy, I don't think what democracy is then. And if this is a way to establish a Palestinian state, I doubt there will be a Palestinian state forever. Now look at who was there. The people who were there, not the typical Palestinian Arabs that you would mention, because those are speaking with us. Those are talking to us back home, not here. Those are, typical British or Scottish people. This is what worries me. So where are those values they grew up with? How can they, if they want to help us, I want to hear a magic solution if they have for the conflict with the Palestinians.
It comes very clear, though, from that clip there. Their intention is a Palestinian state, not in Judea and Samaria or the West Bank as a proposed Palestinian state, but the entire state of what is now modern Israel.
The Palestinians themselves agreed on the Palestinian future state. Yes, there are issues. There are main, points that our leaders back home are talking to the Palestinians, negotiating. Yes, with the ups and downs, and that's a natural thing. It happened here in Northern Ireland, I think, and it's happening all over the world. And it's our responsibility. We know it. Israeli citizens knows that yes, we want to see the Palestinians living in dignity in their own state. But this can never be possible with such calls for Israel apartheid, or independent state of independent Palestinian state from the sea to the river, and here in a Western country.
Yeah, and we've got a clip to go to now, and this is a very important clip. It's called "Is Israel an Apartheid State?"
Israel's enemies and critics accuse the Jewish nation of being an apartheid state.
Today's Nazis, the so-called Third Reich, lives again in the form of these Zionists in the apartheid state of Israel. That's right, they're the new Nazis. And we are here to say that Hamas, these are freedom fighters. Hamas, these are our heroes. Hamas, these are our role models.
But there's no doubt that within the occupied territories, Palestinian land, that there is a horrendous example of apartheid.
Meet Corporal Eleanor Joseph. She recently became Israel's first female Arab-Israeli paratrooper. Corporal Joseph was born in Haifa. She remembers when Hezbollah terrorists fired Katyusha rockets into her mostly Arab neighborhood. Eleanor said, "If someone tells me that the IDF is just killing Arabs, I remind them that Arabs are killing Arabs."
שלום. היי. רבת אלינור ג'וזף, ערבייה, נוצרייה, מאיפה?
מחיפה.
ולוחמת.
נכון.
קרבית. איפה?
בקרקל.
את בכלל מתנדבת כמובן.
נכון.
מה הביא אותך להתגייס למרות שאני מניח שבשכונה שלך, זאת שכונה ערבית בחיפה?
כן.
כולם סביבך ערבים?
כן, למרות שחיפה ידועה בדו-קיום.
ואף אחד לא מתגייס בסביבה שלך? מהבנות בטח לא.
לא.
אז מה הביא אותך?
אבא שלי, הוא גם היה כאילו לוחם בצנחנים.
But how can it be? An Arab woman serving in Israel's armed forces? Isn't Israel an apartheid state? Did you know that there have been Arab members of Israel's parliament since the very first election in the 1940s? Since then, 63 different Arab Israelis have served in the Knesset. Some have even held the post of Deputy Speaker of the Knesset.
Born into an influential family in Nazareth, Hanin is used to making history. She was the very first woman ever to represent an Arab party in the Israeli parliament.
In 2010, the first Arab woman elected to the Knesset was actually on board the Turkish flotilla that tried to break Israel's naval blockade of Gaza.
I feel I am responsible to carry this message.
In Israel, all Arab citizens have the right to vote. Arab women have more rights in Israel than in most Muslim countries. They are free to dress as they like, attend school and universities, serve in the military, run for political office, and yes, even speak out against the government they serve in. But how can it be? Isn't Israel an apartheid state? 4 years ago, refugees began arriving in Israel from war-torn Sudan. While most of the world turned their back on the genocide in Darfur, with Hamas and Hezbollah leaders even praising Sudan's president, tiny Israel has allowed nearly 25,000 African refugees to seek asylum within their borders. Most of those fleeing the Muslim massacres in Sudan went first to their Muslim neighbors in Egypt. But there, they faced racism and more massacres. So despite the threat of death or arrest, thousands fled Egypt and came to the border with Israel, where they finally found a safe refuge. Even though it is a strain on the economy, it is the heart of the Jewish people to help the needy, the lost, and the hurting. As survivors of genocide, Israel empathizes in a way other nations can't. So the Israeli government has allowed the Africans in and has asked various organizations to assist the refugees. Charities across Israel, like the Carmel Shelter, are happy to help.
They told the immigration police about us in 2006, because at that time, there was the very first Sudanese family came. Now there's thousands. Anyone who is lived in this land knows the legacy of the Holocaust. We can't turn our backs on people who suffer genocide, like the people of Darfur, those who are suffering at the hands of radical Islam. We have to open our doors.
But how can it be? Muslims and African refugees living freely in Israel? Isn't Israel an apartheid state? Actually, young, reborn Israel has always been a miklat, which is Hebrew for haven or sanctuary. Back in 1977, a boat full of Vietnamese refugees was discovered by an Israeli cargo ship. The desperate Vietnamese had been ignored by other ships from Germany, Norway, Japan, and Panama, but the Israelis didn't hesitate to pick them up. Prime Minister Menachem Begin authorized all of them to become Israeli citizens, comparing their situation to the plight of Jewish refugees seeking a haven during the Holocaust. Then U.S. President Jimmy Carter praised Israel for their action, saying, quote, "I was particularly impressed that the first official action of Prime Minister Begin's government was to admit into Israel 66 homeless refugees from Vietnam who had been floating around in the oceans of the world, excluded by many nations who are their neighbors, who had been picked up by an Israeli ship and to whom he gave a home. It was an act of compassion, an act of sensitivity and recognition by him and his government about the importance for a home for people who were destitute, again typifying the historic struggle of the people of Israel." But how can this be? Isn't Israel an apartheid state?
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. And as you saw in that clip there, that the accusations made against the State of Israel, that Israel is an apartheid state, are complete lies. And we can see by groups like the BDS and the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign wanting to use the issue as apartheid in order to delegitimize and demonize the State of Israel. And we can see from there that clearly Israel is anything but an apartheid state. Ishmael, I want to read out a quote, if I can. This is from Canada's Minister of Justice and Attorney General, Irene Colton. This is what he said recently, which I found shocking. He said that Israel is the only state in the world today, and the Jews are the only people in the world today that are the object of standing threats from governmental, religious and terrorist bodies seeking their destruction. And what is most disturbing is the silence, the indifference and sometimes the indulgence in the face of such genocidal anti-Semitism. And surely we're seeing today that groups like the BDS and the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign are not really concerned about the plight of the Palestinian people, but want to delegitimize and demonize the State of Israel.
That is right. First, the clip speaks for itself. If I would go to East London here, I would see worse than apartheid, according to what they are saying. Should we or should they launch a London or Islington apartheid week or one day? No. Aren't there any issues here to deal with, speaking only about Israel? Look what's happening in Syria. Palestinians are being killed only 3 weeks ago, I think, in Yarmouk refugee camp. How many Palestinians were killed? Not even one voice here by the BDS and other human rights movements here in this country. See what's happening with the Palestinians in Lebanon. Until today, they are not holding a citizenship even. The way they are being treated. Not leave the Palestinians. Go to other, around the Middle East, other countries. Women, for instance. There are countries that they are not able even, to vote, not able to drive. What is that considered? And speaking about Israel, are they speaking about the Palestinians or Israel itself? If they are speaking about Israel itself, I am here today to say that Israel is existing, strong, steady, and prospering. And it's my moral responsibility to make sure that it continue to be so. By any means, not legal, not any other mean, Israel is or can be considered as an apartheid. So, those accusations, I think, when they become hypocritic, you're judging Israel but ignoring what's happening in Syria and other places, where the call is to demonize and delegitimize the state of Israel, are null and void. And I think this is the main danger, because they are coming from a Western country. Because yes, we are standing since 1948. Israel was established against threats, existing threats, day and night, from Arab countries around. But I see that the threat today, the real threat, is from this ignorance, from this silence here in Western countries.
Which is extremely alarming. But if we actually go back to the Arab world, surely that's where the real apartheid is. The treatment of Palestinians living in Jordan, the treatment of Palestinians living in Lebanon and in Syria not being able to have the vote, not being recognized as citizens, facing discrimination and persecution, is alarming. And particularly you mentioned as well the recent bombing by Assad's regime on a Palestinian refugee camp. It's not just one, it's been a number of different Palestinian refugee camps have been killed, in which anything between 40, 50, 60 Palestinians have been murdered, essentially. And yet all these groups are absolutely silent on this issue. It's absolutely shocking.
It is shocking. I can give you another example. Look at the Christian communities around the Middle East. In Egypt, in Lebanon, in Syria, Jordan, other places. Only in Israel, the community is growing and flourishing. The only country in the entire Middle East where Christians live in democracy, in an open society, thriving. That's enough example.
We got a clip to go to now that really does look at where the real apartheid is occurring in the Middle East today.
In these days, human rights organizations are spearheading worldwide Israel Apartheid Week. Dozens of cities and hundreds of university campuses are inciting against and defaming the only democracy in the Middle East. What haven't they accused us of? Ethnic cleansing, discrimination, racism, and even war crimes. While human rights organizations devote most of their efforts spreading lies of Israeli apartheid, they are also silent. They are silent while countless abuses and terrible violations of human rights are systematically taking place throughout the Middle East. The truth is, there is apartheid in the Middle East, an Arab apartheid. Did you know that every year over 5,000 Arab women are murdered in so-called honor killings to defend their family names? A true example of human dignity and freedom. By the way, a Saudi court sentenced the young Shaima Jasnia to 10 lashes for driving a car. Despite all the human rights in Saudi Arabia, women are forbidden to drive. In Sudan, Egypt, and Uganda, millions of women are circumcised in order to deny them sexual gratification. Outrageous gender apartheid. In enlightened Egypt, an entire police unit operates with the sole intention of purifying homosexual venues. But when you come to think about it, it's still preferable to Iran, because in Iran, they simply hang them. The Arab League formally rejected granting civil rights to Palestinians. For example, in Lebanon, they are not allowed to vote or open businesses. Is this humanitarian treatment of refugees? Oh, I forgot. Over 7,500 men, women, and children were unconscionably slaughtered this past year by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and he continues unabated. Human rights organizations, as usual, remain blind, deaf, and dumb. Israel Apartheid Week is an oxymoron of hypocrisy and lies, underscoring the scandalous silence of human rights organizations about the real apartheid occurring daily in the Arab Middle East. Let's learn from history. Come, help expose false accusations and incitement against Israel and those whose human rights are genuinely being trampled. We invite you to take part in the Zionist effort on behalf of human rights in the Middle East and speak out against Arab apartheid.
Welcome back to the Middle East report. Ishmael, how do we confront this? Because this is a growing problem. So many of these groups like the BDS movement, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, Palestinian human rights groups are wanting to close down any Israeli speakers and arguments at university campuses. Isn't there a great danger in this that our own democracy here in Britain and the West is under threat if spokesmen like you are not being given an opportunity to put Israel's side of the story?
You know, in the beginning when I came here, they said, okay, well, those are minority margins in the society here in the UK and in Europe. I don't think so. I think the threat is silence of the majority. And I'm going back to the first thing I said here in the beginning, is that we are trying to represent the country honestly and bring accurate reports about and facts about what's happening in Israel. And I want to see more voices, sane voices, who are against those extremist voices accusing Israel as an apartheid and so on, to stand up and speak up for us. They have to wake up. If they don't do so, I think the future will look much worse. I want to see people who are standing up, speaking, saying clearly that this is not the tradition of hospitality of the United Kingdom. This is not the tradition of democracy in this great kingdom. No, the British people and ourselves have so much to build together, to share together, and we the same voices have to do it together, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, because other way the other side will be a real existent threat for democracy. I want to see leaders on campuses here who are standing up. Yes, freedom of expression is fine. Freedom to demonstrate and protest, that's also fine. But you can't protest against every Israeli dancer who is coming here, Israeli singer who is coming here, Israeli speaker who is coming here, somebody like myself who is going to speak on campus, Israeli ambassador who is going to speak on campus, educational institution, and he have to be there with the battalion of security. Where is the democracy here? So where is the responsibility of leadership here in the civil society? I want to see that happening. You know, in a week and a half or in 2 weeks, the Israel Apartheid Week will take place on campuses. And I'm sending a call from here to every person who believes in democracy and who believes in freedom, real freedom of expression and mutual respect, to stand up, to do everything possible, of course, to counter it.
Which it needs to. Because what we've seen really is on behalf of the whole Palestinian movement, it's just lies and hatred targeted against Israel. I mean, everyone wants to see the Palestinians live in dignity themselves, but the way that they are treated by their own leadership is full of corruption. Look at the way that Hamas treat their own people in Gaza. Look at the way the Palestinian Authority, the leadership there, actually steal from their own people, keep them in poverty. And you can see this perpetual cycle of violence and poverty because the Palestinian leadership themselves have failed at every opportunity to make peace with Israel and actually don't desire peace with Israel. And surely that's the fundamental problem with the Palestinian leadership and also with these groups like BDS, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, Palestinian human rights groups. All they're interested in is the destruction of Israel and to demonize Israel rather than really to stand up for the Palestinians who are suffering in Jordan, Lebanon and Syria, and yet they're silent.
You know, I can say that clearly, and I think that, from my only being a year here, I think they, to be honest with you, and I'm speaking from the top of my heart, bottom of my heart, that they hate Palestinians more than they hate Israel. But again, Israel became more obsessive about Israel. Probably they are greedy, envy for the success of Israel. Israel will continue to succeed, its success and prosperity.
Excellent. And I think we're down to the final part of the program, Ishmael. We've got 5 minutes left of the program, and I've got your book here called A Shepherd's Journey, the story of Israel's first Bedouin diplomat, and I think we've got the book there. Can you tell our viewers about this book? And
in December 2006, when I arrived to San Francisco to start my position there, my assignment as a deputy consul, we were full of excitement. Being the first Bedouin, of course, going to serve in that part of America. People started to ask those questions. Really, isn't Israel only a Jewish state? Only, and how come that if you are a Bedouin and representing the state? So that was very a confusing story or a shocking story. And the question repeated itself time after time after time. And then I decided to write this book. It's not about me, it's about Israel, the multicultural. Yes, there are issues of equality, there are issues of, discrimination sometimes. We are a normal country. We are not a perfect country like the United Kingdom here, or other countries.
Anything but perfect.
Or other, and I decided to write it. And it tells, the story of a shepherd who can become a diplomat. The equal opportunities. In Israel, you are judged based on your skills, your talents, your willing, and your motivation to contribute to the country. And this is what it tells.
Excellent. And it's a wonderful story of true meritocracy, in which you can come from being so like a shepherd boy to becoming a diplomat. Also, the embassy as well is producing a Christian newsletter designed for the Christian community. Can you tell our viewers about this?
Yes,
how they can sign up?
Absolutely. The last week we launched the first edition of this. Our ambassador launched the first edition of the newsletter for Christian, communities here in the UK.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's just on the screen, so we just showed it on the screen with an email.
So
as well.
yeah, so it brings everything about related to the Christian community in Israel and about what's happening in Israel. And I really call everybody to connect to us, and who they subscribe to it on through the email of the embassy, and
excellent.
to receive it.
And do you have a message for our viewers, Ishmael?
Israel is a democratic country. Israel is a multicultural country. Israel wants to see peace and will make peace with everybody who is ready to sacrifice for peace. Israel and Israelis want to see the Palestinians living in dignity in their own state. This is what our leaders are saying. Right or left, Arabs or Jews. This is the only way, and it's going to happen only through negotiations, through peace talks. And Israel is doing that. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail, sometimes we do better, sometimes we do less. But this is the only way. If anybody believes that Israel is is a democracy, if anybody really believes that the Palestinians deserve this right, they have to stand up and stop accusing and spreading poisonous venom of messages against Israel.
Ishmael, well said.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you so much for being my guest today on the Middle East Report and sharing your personal journey as a shepherd boy living in a Bedouin community in the Galilee to going on to become the first Bedouin Israeli diplomat and representing Israel on the highest level of diplomacy. And it's great that you're here. And I think it's very, very important that you're here. I know from many of the people I've interviewed, you come very highly recommended. That's why some of them said that I should have you on the Middle East Report. And I'm so glad I have, because what you've been able to explain and talk through is the lies and the propaganda that's targeting Israel in terms of Israel being an apartheid state. And you're living an example of how Israel is a true democracy. Not only a true democracy, but a true meritocracy, that you can come from a small Bedouin community in the north of Israel to represent Israel at diplomatic level. It's amazing.
Well, thank you very much. It was also my pleasure being here. And let me be clear. I've been about 3 weeks ago. I visited northern Scotland.
So I'm going to have to leave you there because we've come to the end of the program, Ishmael. So thank you very much for joining me in today's program. And I want to thank you all for watching today's Middle East Report. As you can see from Ishmael's own words, that Israel is not an apartheid state, and we have to confront the lies, the propaganda that's been targeting Israel as a Jewish state. And let's really stand up for the real Palestinians who are suffering in Jordan, Syria, and in Lebanon, because that's where the real apartheid is going. So keep watching, and thank you for watching today's Middle East Report.
Come and sing a simple song for Israel. Sing it like you never sung before. Let it fill the air, tell the people everywhere. Israel stands for peace and not for war. Hey there, Arab people, can you hear me? We just want to live here proud and free. If you lay down your arms, no, you will not come to harm. We don't plan to push you in the sea. Come on, sing a simple song for Israel. Sing it like you never sung before. Let it fill the air, telling people everywhere. Israel stands for peace and not for war. No No doubt some folks enjoy doing battle. There's not many Jews on that list. Just let them fade away. It don't matter what they say. I'm sure their words of hatred won't be missed. Come and sing a simple song for Israel. Sing it like you never sung before. Let it fill the air, tell it